that exchange between Senator Cruz and Donald Trump over natural-born citizenship. I just recently saw a Reuters poll that shows that 27%, I believe it was, or 28%, somewhere along those lines, of Republicans believe that Senator Cruz is not qualified or eligible, to be president based on the citizenship issue. I thought I'd talk to somebody.
That's scary.
And I thought I'd talk to somebody much smarter than me about this. You
don't want me to comment on that.
Low there, I have to admit, the bar is extremely low. But this is a guy who wrote an article that I actually refer people to a lot. William Jacobson goes by Bill. He's the founder of Legal Insurrection and College Insurrection, and he's also a clinical professor of law and the director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell Law School in Ithaca, New York. Welcome to Caffeinated Thoughts Radio, Bill.
Thanks for having me on.
So, natural-born citizenship, this is not a settled thing?
It's not I don't like the word settled. I
Okay.
think that it's pretty clear that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio fall within an acceptable definition. But I don't like the word settled because that presumes that it has been definitively decided by the Supreme Court, which it's never been decided, never really been addressed in any meaningful way. So I don't like the word settled, but by saying I don't like the word settled, that doesn't mean I think there's a legitimate dispute about it. So I'm happy to get into that, but
Sure.
I just don't like the word settled in this context.
Well, so Bill, tell us what we have with respect to legal precedent and so on and so forth that would lead us to believe what you said earlier, which is that these guys are qualified.
Sure. The term natural-born citizen is used only once in the Constitution, and it has to do with qualification for president. So there's no definition, there's no explanation in the Constitution. And where you start, where we should always start in interpreting the Constitution, is with the words of it. But here the words don't really help us very much because there's no explanation and it's not used anyplace else. But I do think the words are important because what is not in the Constitution is a term which has been frequently used historically of native-born citizen. If the framers of the Constitution, and this is how you interpret any statute or any law or anything, that you assume they meant by not using certain words, that's very significant. So the fact that the term native-born citizen is not a requirement, I think is extremely significant because it signals that had the framers wanted to require that only somebody born within the territory of the United States could be president, they could have very easily used the term native-born citizen. So that's extremely important.
So at the time of the Constitution was being written, were there countries that used that standard native-born citizenship?
Well, that is one of the historical framings, and that's what some people are trying to claim now. But the fact of the matter is that even Britain, and what the Supreme Court has said is that interpreting the Constitution when it's unclear what a phrase means, you do look to whether there was a common understanding based on British common law of a particular term, because it's presumed that the framers were familiar with British common law at the time they framed the Constitution. The problem is British law was not clear on the subject. And in my article that I wrote in 2013, I went through this in great detail. Britain didn't have the term natural-born citizen. It had the term natural-born subject.
Yeah.
And if we're going to say that words matter, then you can't simply say that natural-born subject is synonymous with natural-born citizen. But even if you did, Britain had, depending on which colony they were in, depending what point in history, they used many different definitions of who would become a natural-born subject of the king. And that included both territorial, but it also included parental lineage, that if you were born to a subject of the king, that you could also be a natural-born subject. So in looking at British law, both common law and statutes, it doesn't give us a clear answer as to what this term means. And that's where a lot of people are slipping up. Like Ann Coulter wrote a piece, and she cited something called Calvin's case from the 1600s, a British case dealing with territorial, becoming a natural-born subject through territorial birth. But that was 150 years before, and there was many other British laws, British statutes, British cases, which did not provide that sort of clarity. So what I can say fairly definitively was that there was no clear and common understanding of British law on the subject of who would become a natural-born subject as it related to territory, because British law provided in different places in the world and at different times many different standards. So we have a term in the Constitution that is not explained in the Constitution, is not explained no matter what anybody will say, and cherry-pick a case here or cherry-pick something there, is not explained by British law. But to me, looking at the text, what could natural-born citizen mean other than you gained your citizenship through birth?
Okay.
I've never heard a logical explanation of what that term could mean other than you gain your citizenship through birth. So to me, looking at it, we have a term that certainly suggests citizenship gained through birth. We have no clear and common understanding. There is nothing. Many scholars, dating back decades ago, have studied the writings of the framers, the debate at the Constitutional Convention. There is nothing to suggest that they had any definition in mind for this. And so what you get is a situation where you have a term which appears to relate to gaining citizenship through birth, no identifiable, demonstrable alternative definition. And so we're in a situation where people are just literally taking theories about what it means. They say, well, there was a European philosopher, Vattel, and in his treatise, he spoke about natural-born citizenship being through, where you're born and your parentage and things like that. But there's no evidence that the framers considered that. And in fact, his treatise, as translated into English at the time the Constitution was enacted, did not use that term. That term was only used in later editions. So you
Interesting.
And I've written on this, and I've written, this is an argument you can't win with people, because every time this comes up, they'll pull some obscure historical reference out. You just can't win it. Okay?
Right.
And, but just because you can't win it, because people keep pulling stuff out, and then it takes them 5 minutes to put it out there, takes you 5 days to research it to prove that they're not right. And by the time you've done completing your research, they've come up with some new obscure historical reference. And every one of them, I have 10,000 words. I have gone through all of the major arguments purporting to claim that there's a legal basis why you have to both be born in the U.S. and both parents have to be citizens. And they are pure speculation. There is nothing substantive they can point to. And that's why I come to the conclusion, because I do consider myself somebody who takes the wording of the Constitution and the intent of the framers seriously, and that should be what we look to. You have a text which I think suggests that someone who gains citizenship through birth is a natural-born citizen. You have nothing that anybody can point to that's other than rank speculation that it means something else. And therefore, I don't believe that we should be excluding people from running who appear to be qualified based upon the plain terms of the Constitution, based upon hypothetical speculative theories, many of which don't even hold water. And so that's my view. That's why I don't believe it's a serious question. The Supreme Court has never addressed it. And this is typical of what they do. They will find, for example, there was a famous Supreme Court case involving a Chinese...
Can I interrupt you for a second, and we'll get back to that?
Sure.
Because I think Brian's got a question. You're listening to Caffeinated Thoughts Radio on Truth Network 99.3 FM. This is Shane Van Art, Brian Myers. We have William Jacobson. a clinical professor of law at Cornell Law School, as well as founder of Legal Insurrection. I highly encourage you to check out legalinsurrection.com. Brian, could you want to jump in there with your question?
Well, yeah, he was moving in that direction. It occurs to me that this could very easily, in a certain scenario, indeed get litigated. And so my question to you, Bill, is if, let's say, for example, that at some point in the future, whether in this election cycle or the next or so on and so forth, that we would have a candidate win the election that has this sort of issue hanging over their head, as it were, and the opposing party then takes it to court. Is this something that the Supreme Court then would indeed take up? And if so, would you care to speculate on where they would come down?
Sure. I think it's extremely unlikely that the Supreme Court or any federal court would consider this on the merits, on the substance of it. Now, Donald Trump at the debate last night said, well, even if there's a 1% chance, we can't risk it. I don't even think there's a 1% chance, but you never know. But, of course, every year in the United States, a certain number of people get hit by lightning, okay? But that doesn't mean you lead your life and never leave the house for fear of being hit by lightning. And I think that's a good analogy here. Multiple federal courts have refused in the Obama context to rule on this issue, and I'll explain why. So the mere fact that, yes, there is a possibility, just like there's a possibility you could get hit by lightning, that the Supreme Court may want to weigh in on this. But I think it's extremely unlikely. And the reason the federal courts have refused to get involved in the Obama case is because of basically two legal doctrines. One is the doctrine of standing. Who has the legal right to challenge this? And that's something where virtually all, or I believe all of the Obama challenges got thrown out, that a voter, that people like that don't have the right to challenge it. I don't think any candidate has ever challenged it, so I don't know if another candidate could challenge it, but that remains to be seen.
Or a Secretary of State, maybe?
I don't think so. But that's the first hurdle. You would have to get a litigant who is willing to bring the case, who has standing, who has the legal right to go into court to challenge it. I don't know if the Democratic nominee would have that right. I don't think so, but that's the first issue. The second issue is what they call justiciability. In fact, I was just looking at a law review article from about a decade ago on this issue.
Less than 2 minutes, Bill.
Sure. The courts do not get involved in what they call purely political issues, okay? And that was the whole thing where people said the court should not have taken the Bush versus Gore challenge, in that election. So courts don't like to make political decisions. Even though we know a lot of their decisions have political implications,
right.
They don't like to make purely political decisions. So historically, courts have refused to even rule on this because of the standing problem and the justiciability problem. I don't see that changing.
Okay. All right. So I thought it was interesting. Did you think Cruz had a good rebuttal to Trump on Thursday evening?
From a political point of view, absolutely. They didn't really get into the legalities of it, but politically, basically what he said is, you announced, Donald Trump, whatever it was, 2 months ago, that you had your lawyers look at this and I was fine. And now you're telling me that I'm not. That's only because I'm gaining on you. And
right.
Trump acknowledged that.
Right. That was beautiful.
Trump, I appreciate that honesty. Trump did say that, yes, because you're doing a little better. That's why I'm raising it now.
Right. Yeah, and as far as the political move, I mean, he's raising a lot of questions, and hopefully, Cruz. I'm a Cruz supporter, so I'm hoping he can overcome it. But thank you, Bill, for coming.